It's day 2 of former Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial, and today jurors are expected to hear more from those who witnessed the final moments of George Floyd's life. Yesterday, the prosecutor opened by playing the 9.5-minute video of Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck as he gasped for breath and called for help. The defense says it will also rely on video evidence and that common sense will prove their client's innocent. Meanwhile, both sides have said they will be introducing new footage that will show how Floyd's death unfolded. For more on this, let us bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. She's also a Loyola Law School professor. So Jessica, for the jurors watching that video, that 9-minute and 29-second video right off the top during the opening statements from the lawyers, specifically the prosecution's opening statement, what do you think the impact of that was on the jurors?
I think it's hard to overstate the impact, and I can speak from my own experience. I had never watched the video from top to bottom in one sitting before, and it had a huge emotional impact, as it should. You saw a fellow human being in the beginning of that video alive, and at the end of that video, he was dead. That should have a huge emotional impact. And this will be central to the prosecution's case. The prosecution said things like, you can believe your eyes. There was a reporting at the end of the day about how the jurors reacted, that a few of the jurors gasped, that they kind of grabbed their armchairs, that they put their head in their hands. That's what the prosecution wants, not to upset the jury, but to say, this tells the story. It's not a snippet. This is almost 10 minutes long, and it's okay to be disturbed because this is disturbing. You don't have to leave your logic and common sense at the door. You don't have to pretend that you're ignorant. Look at this video, and we're going to see the prosecution understandably loop back to this video over and over again. It is not a coincidence. It didn't happen by happenstance that the prosecution decided to lead with this. This is the lead part of their case.
I want to play some sound from the defense lawyer, Eric Nelson, focusing also kind of on common sense in his opening statement. Let's just play some of it.
A reasonable doubt is a doubt that is based upon reason and common sense. At the end of this case, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about doubt. Reason is an idea that wholly permeates our law, our legal system, and it forms the foundation. And you will see and hear that repeatedly throughout the course of this trial. What would a reasonable police officer do? What is a reasonable use of force? What would a reasonable person do in his or her most important affairs? What is a reasonable doubt? As such, reason dictates and necessitates how the evidence must be looked at and analyzed in every single case.
I actually thought this was kind of interesting, and I'm thinking of myself as a juror because I'm not an expert, I'm not a lawyer, and I thought, when you take the word reasonable out of kind of the confines of the law and you just think, is this a reasonable thing to do? I thought this argument doesn't seem like a strong argument on his part because everything about that video seems unreasonable. Now, under the law, it's maybe a different definition, but sort of common sense and reason, when you look at that video, it doesn't feel like you're seeing common sense and reason. But maybe you got something out of different than I did out of the way he was building that argument. What do you make out of it?
No, I don't think we should take anything away from your reaction. And I think that's what the prosecution wants, which is I am acting as a reasonable person. And this is what I took from it. What's interesting, to answer your question, is that both sides are saying, jurors, trust yourself. Jurors, you don't have to ignore who you are. You don't have to ignore common sense. And this is something that we see politicians argue. We trust you, and we trust you to make the right decision. The prosecution saying, trust yourself. You saw the video, that's enough. The defense saying, trust yourself on these 2 points. This is going to be the crux of the defense's claim here. One, this isn't actually excessive force, but you have to look at a bigger part of the story. We talked about this a little bit yesterday morning. The defense saying that that video does not, in fact, tell the whole story. The defense trying to do, understandably, everything it can to say, don't keep focusing on the video. Look at all these other things. The defense also saying, and we heard this in the tape, reasonable doubt, because let's remember what the defense has to do. Maybe that's not a compelling argument to you. Maybe it's not a compelling argument to me. But what they need is one juror to say, you know what? I think Chauvin did it, but I do have some doubt. And I think that's actually reasonable doubt. So the legal question here isn't, do the jurors think it's more likely than not that Chauvin did it? The legal question here is, can you get one juror to say, I do have some doubt, and it rises to the level of reasonable doubt? Because we know in criminal juries, you need a unanimous verdict, because we're doing the most serious thing we can do to another human being, take their liberty away, put them in prison. And so that's where the defense's whole case is, trying to get one. It's better for the defense if they can get more than one, but to say, trust your gut, trust what a doubt is, trust what a reasonable doubt is. Again, doesn't have to be compelling to all of them.
So, Jessica, let's drill down a bit into some specifics, because it was something that Anne-Marie and I have spoken about in the past, just off camera, just to ourselves, with regards to the video and the time of death. So we know that by the time the EMT responded to Mr. Floyd, that he was unresponsive and that they couldn't find a pulse. But over the course of the next hour, even on his way to the hospital, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports that they tried to revive him. If you are Mr. Nelson, are you able to make a case, however flimsy, that perhaps there was an opportunity for Mr. Floyd to be revived? In other words, I'm trying to understand, when we look at that video and we see George Floyd struggling, and then we see him go unresponsive, and Derek Chauvin still has his knee on his neck. The EMT workers arrive. He still has his knee on George Floyd's neck. And finally, when they pick him up and they put him on the stretcher, according to the Star-Tribune, they try to find a pulse. They try, and they don't succeed in finding one. And the cause of death is pronounced later at the hospital. But could Eric Nelson say, well, we're not even sure that he died at that particular moment? It may have been after. I'm just trying to understand, if you're trying to create this little tiny window for a reasonable person is going to watch that video and see a man struggling for breath and struggling to survive, and then see him unresponsive for, several minutes afterwards, and think that he's expired. He has passed away under the knee of that officer.
Yeah, and I think that this is such an important question, because it's the defense saying, let's not just look at the beginning of that video when George Floyd is alive and responsive, and the end of that video when he's not responsive, when they cannot find a pulse and Officer Chauvin keeps his knee on George Floyd's neck. Let's look at what happens after, where the EMT, and again, this is part of the defense's whole theory of the case, right? Let's look before, let's look after, and let's look at what happened in the context, other factors, other people, other perceptions. To your specific point, Vlad, I think what the defense is going to say is, one, the EMTs continue to try and revive him. And so does that show that it was not just Officer Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck? And then they're going to pivot, as we saw in the opening statements, to talking about other causes that they will say contributed to George Floyd's death. We're going to hear a lot of medical testimony, and this was in your question, what are the medical experts going to say? We're going to hear a lot of medical testimony about asphyxiation, medical testimony about heart disease, about high blood pressure, about how the body responds to fentanyl, how the body responds to methamphetamines. And so, again, the defense's role here isn't to build a case. The defense's role here is to try and find one aspect of the case and tear it down enough to get one juror to say, well, when exactly did he die and why, right? That's the and why is the crux of it. Two things we're going to keep hearing about. Was it in fact excessive force? What in fact was the substantial cause?
Two solid questions, and I'm sure we will hear more about that today. Jessica, thank you so much. Wish we could keep talking to you all the way until the beginning of day two. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.